Russian troops may enter the Dnipropetrovsk region. Donald Trump, the president of the USA, sees progress in resolving the Russian-Ukrainian war. US Ambassador Bridget Brink is resigning, and Britain plans to send its troops to Ukraine for 5 years. About this and more right now in my traditional briefing. Welcome friends to my channel. I am Alexander Musienko. Friday, April 11th. And now for you, a selection of operational information on those events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. There is traditionally something to talk about. About what? Well, firstly, CNN published an article about Russian troops trying to enter the Dnipropetrovsk region. They want to enter, and this would give them leverage in negotiations, as CNN notes. Expansion. The expansion of hostilities is one of the goals of the Russian command. Control, even over a small part of the Dnipropetrovsk region, can become strategic, important in future negotiations for Putin. Let's break this down step by step. Firstly, those who follow my channel know that I have previously mentioned that the goal, is essentially offensive actions. The enemy's actions in the Pokrovsk area have shifted from some operational strategic plans to more tactical and media political propaganda ones. That is, there is more of an informational aspect than a real one. What does this involve? It involves the fact that indeed the enemy would strive to cross the administrative border from the Dnipropetrovsk region to enter even 2 square kilometers of territory in order to declare that, in some places, that's it. They have already reached the administrative borders of the Donetsk region and control the respective settlements of the territory, of course, to use this for informational and psychological operations. This is the true goal of the enemy when we talk about their actions. Are they capable of developing, well, let's say, an operational offensive after this? A more significant and larger scale one towards the Dnipro? No. They lack the strength. And there are calculations and estimates from British intelligence in which I want to remind you that, for example, they calculated that for Russia to advance towards cities like Dnipro or Zaporizhzhia, they would need to concentrate up to 2 million troops in this area and at least several months, if not more, if not up to a year, to achieve these goals. Currently, such forces do not exist, despite the fact that the enemy is indeed constantly reinforcing its group, but as of now, such forces are not present. Therefore, this goal, which exists, is indeed before the negotiations, which may actually take place one way or another regarding a ceasefire, by the way, because this is interesting. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce noted that President Trump made it clear that in negotiations with Russia, there is only one point, a ceasefire. There will be no other dynamics until this is resolved. She also emphasized that this is not a conflict that can drag on for another 6 months or a year. According to her, the president made it clear that in negotiations with Russia, there is only one point, a ceasefire. The United States supports the diplomatic path, but is closely monitoring how the process unfolds. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, after a meeting at NATO, noted that it will become clear within a few weeks whether Russia is truly serious. In Washington, these words are taken literally, and it is believed that Russia should treat this with utmost seriousness. By the way, a change in the position of US President Trump regarding Russia is not ruled out. Radosław Sikorski. In an interview with Polish media, he said that Donald Trump's approach might change, not taking into account that Putin is really being drawn into his aggressive war, the path to a ceasefire. I would like to say that at the moment, it's not even about the path to peace. This is a path to a temporary state, to a truce, to a ceasefire, to what we really can achieve this year. It is important to understand that there are grounds to believe this, and ultimately a certain negotiation process. It is ongoing. One way or another, we see that Russian representatives met with Americans in Istanbul. The meeting lasted about 6 hours, as a result of which there was an exchange of prisoners, an exchange of captives. The United States took back the citizens they were interested in, 10 citizens in total, and Russia took back theirs. In particular, one Russian citizen who was detained in Cyprus is suspected of selling and supplying to the Russian Federation, to Russia, components and chips that are not the latest models, but nonetheless necessary for Russia in order to, well, essentially to continue the war. That is, he was working for the military-industrial complex. By the way, a citizen who lived in the USA but came to visit relatives in Russia was also released, and she was detained on suspicion of treason. She was detained by law enforcement agencies in Russia, or rather, let's call them the punitive organs of Russia. It should be more accurately and correctly stated that it was for donating to the Ukrainian army. Well, that's basically why she was detained. Well, she was handed over, meaning certain, let's say, well, it's important to understand that Russia is doing everything to, let's say, present the negotiation process with the USA. Right now, the discussion is correct. Bruce, as noted by the State Department spokesperson, the discussion is actually about a ceasefire. There is no discussion about anything else. That is, a ceasefire as the first step that must occur before any further actions. But Russia is not agreeing to this at the moment. They need to be pressured, which I hope will come from the US towards Russia. And Russia is imposing under this a dialogue about normalizing relations, about the economy, about diplomacy, about politics, prisoner exchanges, and many steps that were supposed to demonstrate some readiness and seriousness, supposedly from Putin, towards dialogue. This is what they are trying to do. Russia is blurring the lines, you see. They are sending Kirill Dmitriev, yes, who supposedly, well, in a suit with glasses, supposedly studied in the United States, has some signs of intelligence and so on, to not scare the local public. And this Dmitriev is going. Negotiating about what? He is not negotiating about a truce. He is negotiating about some economic ties, starting to talk about the rare earth metals, minerals, natural resources, and so on that Russia has. That is, look, invest in Russia, do business here with us, we are ready to help you, implement joint economic projects, let's work together. So in fact, what is this actually leading to? They are diluting the main point of what the negotiations are actually about. So that's the situation. Well, and meanwhile, Admiral Samuel Paparo spoke before the committee, before the senators of the Armed Services Committee. In fact, not long ago, the commander of NATO forces in Europe, General Cavoli, spoke before this committee. He was there last week now. They are hearing from the head of the Indo-Pacific Command, and he noted that China provides 70% of the machinery and 90% of the microchips that Russia receives for its industry, and in exchange, China receives technologies to make submarine movements undetectable and other types of assistance. China and North Korea are taking from Russia what they currently need very much, which is the strengthening of their naval component. Both China and North Korea aspire to have their own nuclear submarines. In fact, this is an idea fix for both Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, who would really like to, and China is now investing and allocating very serious funds into ship production, strengthening its own naval forces precisely with the aim, well, as they declare, to protect their interests in their waters in the South China Sea. But in reality, this is also to challenge the United States of America and other countries that are actually present in the Indo-Pacific region, with the aim of, let's say, demonstrating their own power. Does this pose a threat to the USA and their allies in the region? Undoubtedly. It poses corresponding threats. It needs to be countered, so attention is being emphasized now. What reaction will be made? What method will be used? For now, it is against China. Tariffs, they are constantly increasing from the USA but there is no pressure on Russia. Still, there is hope from the US President Trump and his team that these negotiations taking place in Istanbul might happen again in Saudi Arabia. Contacts that have now once again been renewed between the intelligence agencies, between the CIA and Russia's foreign intelligence. In some aspects, let's say that this will eventually bring some success. Well, that's the situation, and in the meantime, today, Ramstein is supposed to take place. Well, it is supposed to be online. Indeed, the US Secretary of Defense is under a hexit who plans to speak and discuss further support for Ukraine, which is good. We see indeed, by the way, very interesting. The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, noted that as soon as we reveal certain data regarding the cooperation between Russia and China, we will immediately see that the position of the US Secretary of Defense regarding his presence at the Ramstein format will change. And indeed, initially it was announced that the hexit might be absent at the Ramstein conference, and then information appeared that it would be online indeed after Ukraine began spreading information about China. And the president of Ukraine turned out to be absolutely right in this situation. So what was spread? It is known that the president said that we are aware of 155 Chinese citizens who might be fighting against Ukraine. They are being recruited through social networks. There is an entire channel, and likely this is known, China. Well, you see, as I mentioned in my videos, there is indeed such a flow, and the existence of a channel, essentially a recruitment channel, which works to involve Chinese citizens in serving in the Russian army. Well, to say that it would just exist somewhere and remain completely incognito, unknown, well, perhaps that's just impossible. And now this is being confirmed. And accordingly, we are waiting for actions. President of Ukraine, Zelensky, said that we are ready to exchange Chinese citizens for Ukrainian prisoners who are in Russia. And indeed, let China use its leverage on the Kremlin and force Putin to return our prisoners of war. It's important to bring our people back. Meanwhile, The Guardian has revealed some information about how much Chinese citizens might be paid. So, a bonus ranging from 8 to 27,000 is emphasized for registration and signing a contract, along with a salary starting from $2,500 per month. This is what is being offered to Chinese citizens. This is the starting bonus for signing the contract. It cannot be less than 8,000 US dollars and can grow up to 27, depending on there. These are further payments if there are feats and so on. But they don't manage to perform these feats because they perish. Well, actually, this is what the Kremlin pays, and indeed, Russia is ready to pay significant amounts, including to its own, thus searching in its hinterlands for those who are willing to go and fight. Money has long overshadowed Russian propaganda and the idea of a great Russian state and the Russian world, because it is precisely money that prevails as the element through which both Russians and citizens of third countries agree to go and fight for the benefit of the Russian army. So, in fact, what is happening and what is being observed is precisely finances. And now that moment has come, it just needs to go in the opposite direction, so that eventually the refrigerator starts to win over propaganda due to the worsening economic situation in Russia. Well, for now, this is not happening, so that's the situation. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian delegation will start its work in the USA today, where consultations on the agreement regarding rare earth metals will take place. And minerals? This week, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy noted in a conversation with journalists that the agreement with the USA on mineral extraction should be beneficial for both countries and must be ratified by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy also somewhat criticized the approach of the US Secretary of Finance, Scott Bessent, regarding its signing. The agreement will be serious and it will be ratified in Parliament. I am defending what belongs to Ukraine. It must be beneficial for both the USA and Ukraine. This is correct, Zelensky said during the conversation. And here he noted something that the US Secretary of Finance Besant likely did not like: the approach regarding an equal approach to concluding the agreement and ensuring that Ukraine appears dignified in this regard. Here, Zelensky's quote is important. I believe Mr. Besant's problems lie in his approach and what he came with. And he said, "You must sign this now," tapping his finger on the contract and saying, "You need to sign this now," to which I could only say to him, "Stop tapping your finger and let's talk." And probably he expected a different dialogue that Ukraine would immediately sign. Here, the president of Ukraine truly acts as a defender of national interests and clearly demonstrates this. At the same time, it must be understood that Besanta might be the very person who has influence over President Trump on many issues. After all, according to the American NBC News channel, it was Besant who was one of the people who convinced President Trump to impose a temporary moratorium on implementing tariffs against European countries. Europe, by the way, also imposed a moratorium and is not implementing tariffs now in order to conduct negotiations with the USA. And one of these people is Scott Bessent, who is likely to be shaping the vision directly for President Trump regarding the mineral resources agreement. Well, the fact that the agreement will be ratified in Parliament will remove some socio-political discourse and provide at least a certain consensus. Secondly, it should declare the seriousness of Ukraine's intentions and, in fact, the seriousness of the commitment to fulfilling the obligations of this agreement. This is also actually important. And during Ramstein, the issue of troop deployment will also be discussed. The Coalition of the Willing held its meeting, and the British publication The Telegraph wrote that Britain plans to send its troops to Ukraine for a period of 5 years. Kaja Kallas, a representative of the European Commission's Foreign Policy and Security, noted that various options are possible. This mission can range from monitoring to deterring Russia. So essentially, that's the situation. In other words, the idea of sending troops is being actively discussed, but specifics are needed, and it's necessary to move from prolonged discussions and dialogue to concrete actions. Discussions are ongoing with weekly meetings. Yes, this is important, but we are waiting for real and concrete actions. One such action was taken by Bridget Brink, the US ambassador to Ukraine, who resigned. The US State Department confirmed this. The Financial Times notes that this likely happened because Bridget Brink disagrees with the approaches of the current Trump administration regarding positions on further actions, including the peaceful resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war. So soon we will have another US ambassador in Ukraine, possibly someone closer to Donald Trump and his ideas, and we need to be prepared for this. But I want to remind you that the US insists on a ceasefire, followed by other negotiations. This is absolutely correct, and I think that we will move forward. In the meantime, despite everything, we stand with confidence, and with God's help, we move and look ahead. Take care of yourselves. Glory to Ukraine.